income through worm farming? Is that even a thing? Yes, it's a thing. And Natalie from Hey It's a Good Life is going to share how she turned her life completely around by starting a garden and a worm farm business. This is part one of a 4-part series about homestead income on the Homesteading for Beginners podcast. This is the Homesteading for Beginners podcast, and I'm Mona Weathers, your homesteading mentor and coach. If you desire to establish a solid foundation for your homesteading journey, then you are in the right place. I'm here to show you how in a way that is healthy for you, your family, and your community. I'll share stories from the past 20 years of my own journey and offer you actionable steps you can take to start and maintain a healthy homestead. I'm excited to share the very first interview episode on this podcast with you today. I've been wanting to do this for a while, but haven't had the opportunity until now. And as I thought about ways to interview my guests, I thought about using Zoom and platforms like StreamYard. But then I was like, how about I use a platform I'm more comfortable with, which is Instagram. I'm very comfortable with Instagram and Instagram Lives. I do those often. The idea of interviewing somebody through Instagram just didn't seem as scary, which maybe sound weird to some people, but as it would if I was in StreamYard or something. I don't know what it is about Instagram Live. I can turn on a switch there. So this interview was originally recorded on Instagram Live. So if you'd like to watch the whole thing, you can go check out on my account. Links will be in the description of this podcast, and you'll also be able to follow Natalie, my guest, and all the great things that she has going on with her business. The next 2 episodes will also be in this format. The downside to recording this way is that the sound is not always the greatest, but I've listened to a number of interviews. I've been on a few interviews where the sound I'm hearing on that isn't that great either. So I'm like, why am I going for the sound? Let's just get the information out there. It's not like this is a bad sound connection, and I edited it so that it was a little bit louder than the original. But you will hear background noise because Natalie is outside, and so there's some noises coming from the outside. So just, ignore that. Know that she's out in her garden, or go watch the whole thing if it'll make more sense to you than listening to this episode. But I encourage you to listen to this episode because I kind of take out some of those moments where we're prepping for the interview. Before we start, I wanted to let you know the free 101 Homestead Income Ideas list is now ready for you to download. I've compiled a list of 101 homestead income ideas and divided them into 3 categories: on homestead income, off homestead income, and online income. This resource is completely free and will prepare you for a free training I have coming up called the 2-week Homestead Income Digital Product Workshop. This free training is coming at the end of February, so grab your freebie today by going to healthyhomesteading.com/homestead income. You can also find the link in the show notes. Okay, grab your earbuds or whatever, a cup of coffee, and listen to this great interview with Natalie from Hey It's a Good Life. So Natalie and I met on this good old Instagram. We were both a part of the Off-Grid Homestead Bundle. That was a few months ago. So if you were there, we met there. But I've actually been following you before that on Instagram. But funny thing is, my daughter, when we had an interview or a chat on Instagram, a live stream back when the Off-Grid Homestead Bundle was going, she reached out to me, my daughter, my oldest daughter, she's almost 30. She said, I know Natalie. I've been following her on YouTube. She was getting into worm farming, and so she knew you, and it was just really funny because I was like, oh, okay. So that was fun. That was a fun thing. But Natalie has such a great story, and she's probably the most likable person on Instagram, in my opinion. She's very sweet and sweet-natured, and I'm just really excited to interview her and talk about how she got started with her worm farming, composting, and all that. So Natalie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background? And have you always been interested in gardening and worm farming, or worms?
Yeah. Well, hey, everybody, and thank you so much for having me on the podcast and on this Instagram Live. My name's Natalie, and my business is Hey, It's a Good Life. It's kind of the mother company of lots of different things that we're up to right now. But as far as, like homestead and business and worm farming is all concerned, everything for me started with the garden and with the worm farm. And it's all taught me so much. And this is why I think when we're talking about mindset with homesteading or business building, it's so important to develop a mindset of how can I do this? Because it's really easy to fall into I can't, or making excuses or whatever it may be. Granted, there's a time and a place to rest and call it quits on things, but for me, the garden was just never something that I could quit on. It was something I always dreamt about. And so when I got married and I had the opportunity to have a garden space, because I had grown up in the city and really never had that opportunity to garden, I mean, it was truly one of the things that we looked for in buying an apartment. I looked for a south-facing, large patio apartment. I mean, it was like that, and it had to have a decent kitchen, because that's just like how I guess I've always been a homesteader on some level. I knew it even before I had the garden. And so we got this apartment. Long story short, my backstory is my father had cancer, passed away in 2013. So this will be 10 years without him here on the earth. And that really opened my eyes to just how broken a lot of our systems are. Then my friend that I used to play volleyball with on the beach in Laguna Beach, they started this company called Primal Pastures. And I was watching their regenerative farm journey unfold online, and they started posting more about the food system and how broken it is. And so there was like this compounding interest effect on me of like, I have to do something. It's not just about eating better. I have to be a part of this change. And so that ultimately led me down the rabbit hole of YouTube, which led me to all of Joel Salatin's videos, binge watch everything. Then I binge watched all of Justin Rhodes at the time, which was a very humble family vlog. And then that led me to one video of Jess's over at Roots and Refuge, which was like, turn your waiting room into your classroom, make the most of it where you are. I was like, all right, I just have to start my garden, and I'm going to YouTube the process. I have no idea what I'm doing with YouTube or the garden or anything, but I'm just going to equip myself as best as I can. And like we were talking about earlier, just test it, let's just go for it and see what happens. And so I did all of the prep work that I could to prepare to garden well. I built garden beds. I researched the best soil, but there were still parts that were confusing to me. And one of them was, how do I protect my soil? So I, at the time, was really interested in back to Eden gardening. And I was like, oh, okay, so we just put mulch on it right away, and this is the best possible option for our gardens. Okay, fantastic. Well, what I didn't realize at the time was that freshly mulched, what is it called? Fresh mulch that's just been, gone from tree to bark is actually not the best for your garden when you're starting off. And what I did was I leached all the nutrients out of the soil. My super expensive Pro Mix soil that I spent all my newlywed budget on, it just went all into the wood chips, and all my plants died. I was totally devastated, and I was like, I have to do something for myself, but also for all 47 YouTube subscribers that I have at the time. Like, I can't let them down. And that ultimately led me to worm farming, and I started learning about composting, and I had this huge problem on my hands. So I started this garden, and I leached all the nutrients out of it. That led me to composting. It was very confusing to me. I didn't understand what compost was. People in the UK were talking about
If you are enjoying
compost,
this
but it was like
podcast,
they were
I would
talking
really
about,
appreciate
soil.
it if you would take a minute to subscribe or
soil
follow.
and compost.
By doing this,
mulch,
you will be
they were all
helping
really
the
three different
podcast
things,
to be
but
seen by
sometimes
more
you can use them
people.
interchangeably.
And I do love
It was very
reading nice
confusing to me.
reviews
So,
too.
long story
Don't
short, I
forget to
figured out
visit
how to start composting,
healthyhomesteading.com
even
for
though
more
I had a small
information on
space,
how
which
I
was
can
my
serve
problem. And this is kind of
Until
how
next
my brain
week, I
works
want
in
you to
business.
keep
It's like,
dreaming, keep
once I
believing,
realized that
and keep
I had a
planning
problem
for your
that other people
homesteading
had,
success.
I was like, oh, I can help other people. And that led me to making a lot more videos and content, just documenting my journey, sharing with people what worked, what didn't work. And there's like this tricky bit where you're not really an expert on something yet, So you can kind of talk about it in terms of like sharing the journey, but then you do gain enough expertise in an area. And I've spent so many hours now worm farming that ultimately I turned that one freebie into an ebook, and then I turned it into a course. And knowing your audience is another huge part of having a business and income on the homestead and everything. And so I realized a lot of people in my audience were homeschool moms. And so I designed a special workbook with coloring pages. And, that one problem of I killed my garden turned into the foundation of building our homestead business, our business that we're going to fund the farm dream with. And so that's why I'm like, yeah, just go for it. You got to test things and just see what happens. And then when you encounter a problem, it's like, how can I develop a solution? Okay, great. How can I turn this solution into something that helps other people as well? And, when you're really passionate about something, I think that rubs off on people. And so I have this crazy community online where we love worm farming. I mean, I literally went to school to be a counselor, spent thousands of dollars on becoming a marriage and family therapist. No regrets about that. It definitely plays a huge role in my life and is a part of where we want to go with our businesses. But I also love that in the age of the internet, we get to pursue our passions and help other people along the way. I just think it's so cool.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate to that just with how I found, I've been homesteading for 20 plus years. And when I came back to this online space, because I took some time off and I came back, I was like, people need to have a good runway onto the homesteading journey and to avoid some of the mistakes I made and that, and my husband and I made and that sort of thing. So that's why I started Homesteading for Beginners podcast. So that's why that is. But so you came up with the worm farming idea from the need that you saw. Is there anything else that, like, you started with a small composting bin, I assume, and then you just kept going?
Yeah.
Is that how it worked?
Yeah. In fact, I could probably pretty easily show you here if you want to see it. I have my original worm farm, and then I have all of the like other worm farms that I built after that. And then we have our big behemoth worm farm. So it really started with just a stackable thing from Amazon that my family got me. And I just, side note, I think for anybody getting into worm farming, I think that the stacking worm farms are a little hokey. It's really all about marketing. And that's, again, another business thing. It's like, you could have the same product, but if it's packaged differently, people might want this one over this one, and it might be the exact same thing. So when it comes to worm farming, people go, oh, should I get the stacking? And I'm like, honestly, you don't need it. But that's where I started. And so I had the stacking worm farm, and then I realized, my friend was actually moving out of California, and he sold me his worm farm for $50. One of the totes alone is like $50. It was super generous of him. And so I bought that worm farm off of him, which was a 12-tote system. Just these little Rubbermaid totes that you can see behind me. And I started cranking out like 2,000 pounds of compost a year. I finally decided, like, I'm going to measure it. So when one of those bins is full, it's about 50 pounds of compost. And I went from buying $500 to $1,000 worth of compost every year to fully fueling our little backyard homestead with just worm compost. Now people say, oh, can I just use worm compost? And I always say, test your soil, because your soil might be different than mine. We might have different needs. But I've been really blown away by the fact that truly we can achieve self-sufficiency, even in a small way, on a small scale in a backyard homestead. But you can easily scale that system up into, I'll just pan this way so anybody watching can see, but behind me, for anybody listening, I've got a 3-foot by 9-foot, essentially garden box, and it's called a flow through worm bin, and you feed it from the top and you harvest from the bottom. And, that I estimate can make over 6,000 pounds of compost a year. So anyway, I forget your original question, forgive me, but it's been a journey with the worm farming. I guess that's the journey, is it started small and it's gotten bigger and bigger over time.
Right. Yeah, that's what my question was. So you answered it. So what are the benefits of worm composting versus just list some of the benefits. People want to get into composting. A lot of times they start with the big, everything, scraps, chicken manure too. They do that type of composting, and then they don't know what to do. I'm actually one of these people. I am not the greatest composter, and I still want to try to get more into worm composting. I've tried a couple times, and I've done the stacking method, But anyway, it has to do with, doesn't have to do with the fact that I didn't have the right knowledge. I just didn't have the right motivation, or, I just didn't keep up with it. So what are the benefits of worm composting, maybe, let's say, versus the regular composting that people do?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's like, I guess this is my opportunity to be on my soapbox, so I'll just answer your question wholeheartedly here, but there are so many benefits. I think the first one for me is space. So if you have space underneath your kitchen sink, no, on the side of your toilet, I mean, don't put your toilet stuff in the worm farm, but like if you have space in your bathroom, or if you have space in your coat closet, I mean, it's truly like you can do it in such a small space, which is amazing to me, because that helps liberate those of us in smaller spaces from being dependent on the big box stores, and helps give us that sense of self-sufficiency, which is what so many of us homesteaders, gardeners are after. So scalability is huge. You can start really small, you can go really big. So what we have right now are totes, but professional worm farmers actually use a windrow system, which is essentially like a short garden bed. It's about 6 to 12 inches off the ground. And it just looks like these giant garden beds. And so, you could go from 1 square foot of space to literally acres and acres of it. So I think the scalability is huge. Secondly, it's fast. So in our course, we have a lot of different people taking it all over the world, from Alaska to Israel to Florida. I mean, people are everywhere taking this course, which is really cool. And so one of my friends and students in Florida actually got compost that was ready to use in 4 weeks. So with traditional thermophilic composting, it could take 6 months, it could take a year, and then there's like this whole other process of heating and turning and watering. And then even still, it sometimes might be hot and you can actually kill your plants. I experienced this with the whole thing that we've all gone through with the last 2 years. I have to like filter my words, so I don't want to get flagged. But when that whole thing happened, some compost companies started cranking out compost sooner than it was appropriate to put their compost on the market, because it was still hot. So a lot of us bought that, used it to start our plants, and all the plant starts died. That's a huge income loss for a small farm or small family like ours. So we had to start completely over. Whereas if I had just used my homemade compost and made my own seed starting mix, I could have saved all those plants. So scalability, it's fast. It's really easy. So once you get the principles down, and I think this is probably what you were referring to earlier, is like, a lot of the principles, but sometimes it's just putting them together in the right way. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad advice out there when it comes to worm farming. So when I was getting started, it was like, oh yeah, just put some cocoa coir and some newspaper in there and the worms and some food scraps and you're good to go. And it's like, really? That's it? I ended up with this huge sopping mess of a worm farm because I was listening to all these people who really had no idea what they were talking about. And I get it. We're all there as content creators. Sometimes we say stuff and it was like, oops, that was a mistake. But there's this real giant misnomer in the worm farming world that you can kind of just chuck things and chuck worms in there and it will all cooperate. But really what worms are doing in the worm farm is they're eating microbes. And so when you're adding an inert substance like newspaper, which doesn't really have microbial activity, it might actually even have some antimicrobial activity in the soy ink, which has pesticides and things. Cocoa coir, which has been heated and pressed and basically robbed of any nutrients. Like, those are items that I don't recommend starting with, simply because it's not creating the worm's natural environment for them to have microbes to eat. What I recommend is mimicking nature and using compost, whether it's worm castings, compost that you've gotten, from a more traditional setup, compost from the store, leaves. And in my free guide and our ebook and in our course, we have a very simple diagram that shows people, like, this is where you start and this is how you layer. And all of those layers, the nitrogen, the carbon, and the worms, are all working synergistically to crank out this amazing compost, which brings me to the fourth point, which is that worm compost and worm farming and vermicompost is what is the official term, is unlike anything else that you can buy on the market, because it is so microbially rich. And really, when you're looking at soil science and you're looking at soil health, it's not about NPK. A lot of us gardeners get sucked into, potassium, phosphorus, nitrogen. That's what I have to look for in my soil. And really, it's about so much more than that. Just like it's like so much more than that with our own health as people. You're not just looking for macronutrients. We're not just looking at calories. We're looking at okay, how's my copper intake? How's my zinc intake? How's my selenium? A lot of us are deficient in things like magnesium, selenium, zinc, copper, and that leads to these health issues. Well, the same is true for our soil. And so, really, it's one of the most microbially rich substances on earth. And it's really like taking God, creation, whatever you want to call it, copying nature and mimicking that in our gardens. In the most ideal growing conditions, there are worms. And people go, oh, worms are great. Worms bring life. No, worms are there because there is life.
Mm-hmm.
So why is there life? Because there's been an exchange between the carbon, which is usually leaves that have fallen, onto the forest floor, which is usually there's some nitrogen, animal droppings, grass. That combination then facilitates life, and then the worms come.
Mm-hmm.
And then it makes this amazing environment for growing. And so we get to mimic the best kind of natural growing environment when we choose to use worm castings and worm compost in the garden. And so, as you can tell, I'm a big fan.
Yeah. And that totally makes sense. And I love how you put that they go where life is. I just, I mean, that's obvious when you just say it, you know, it doesn't require you to really think, yeah, obviously they're going where life is. So, and then they just make their little house there for a while.
Yeah, just like us, right? Like we want the ideal conditions for living. We're going to find the ideal neighborhood, ideal house.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a pretty beautiful thing when you can help facilitate that and get a beautiful product at the end.
So you kind of explained like the process. So I don't know if we need to go into that anymore, but is there anything else you want to share about like the worm composting process, you know, or the vermiculture, I should say it right?
Yeah.
Like how the basics of it, not like really deep into it, but like if somebody was getting started, what are the tools they need? What are they need a tote, what else, you know, and leaves.
Yeah. And leaves. Well, I would say just grab our quick start guide. It's free on our website and it literally outlines everything for you. And it's got clickable links. So you can literally build a worm farm. I called it Start Your Worm Farm Today, I think, because it literally gets you set up to start your worm farm that same day. And it's interesting. I don't know if you've noticed this like in business or anything, but there's kind of these different templates of people, different, what's the right word? Like archetypes almost. And a lot of us, people who are interested in worm farming, we're very excitable, but we can also be a little bit distracted. And so one of the ways that I help streamline people and keep them focused on the goal of actually having success, and I think a lot of us have not had success, so we feel discouraged from starting a compost again because it's like, oh, I'm totally going to fail at this again. And so I say just visit our website, get the fail-proof way to get started. But really it's a bin with some holes in it. I like 3/16 size holes drilled about 2 inches apart at the bottom, a bag from the grocery store, just a brown paper bag or two. I like leaves after that. So that's kind of like you're creating a sponge at the bottom, and then compost. So you're creating like the home, the microbial life. And then you can start to add things like grit because worms are a lot like chickens. They have gizzards, and that's actually how they digest their foods. Worms actually don't have like lips or anything. They walk. They walk. That's not the right term, but they move about, and they actually are just like this the whole time, and they're just slurping the microbial slurry. And so they rely on the internal parts like the crop and the gizzard to digest things for them. And so you'll add your worms, your grit, your food scraps, and then always cover with browns. And I like to repeat that process a couple times because the thermal mass does help against any kind of temperature fluctuation. So the more you can fill your bin with different those different layers, those are about 2 inches of each layer. It does kind of help regulate against any shifts in the environment outside. So I like to fill it as full as you can. If you can only get a couple layers in there, that's a fine way to start. That's pretty much it. So bin, bag, leaves, compost, grit, greens, worms, food scraps, and then always cover with browns.
So it really does sound really simple when you just put it that way, you know, like it's only a few things. Where do you get the worms? If someone's going to start, where do you get the worms? Where do they initially get those worms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in our guide, I have currently linked, I believe it's Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. They're a very popular source for worms simply because they are available on Amazon. So you get that fast shipping. The one thing I will say about Uncle Jim's is that they ship them in a drier material, and so sometimes there are worms that are dead on arrival. If that happens to you, though, Uncle Jim's is really good about getting you new worms. So yeah, just you want to keep an eye out for your package there. But I actually recommend to people, and I think I have this in the guide, of contacting somebody in a local garden group on Facebook. That's how I've gotten a lot of worms for free. And then you're getting them fresh. You're getting them with that inoculation of the microbial life from that person's vermicompost. Another great way to get worms is just type in worm farm near me on your search browser. And another thing to keep in mind when you're getting locally from a professional worm farmer or a fellow gardener is those worms are going to be more acclimatized to your area. And so just like with large livestock, we want to be mindful of their climate. In fact, I've heard it said, animals will really struggle going, is it north to south? I always forget, is that longitude or latitude? I think it's longitudinally. So anyway, they struggle if you take them too far north or south from where they originated. But if you can keep them more lateral, like just more west to east, that helps. And honestly, the same idea applies to worms. So if you can get worms that are already accustomed to your climate, they're going to have a much easier time inoculating the worm bin, creating those babies, and creating more worm compost for you.
Okay, that's good information. We have a lot of red wigglers on our property because we have woods and we have horse manure, which apparently they love both of those things. So
you mentioned an important point that I forgot to mention, which is that there's all kinds of worms, and I get questions a lot about, can I just dig up worms from my yard and throw them in the compost? I know some people who have success with that, but there's actually supposedly over 10,000 species of worms out there. I think there's probably more, and only about 9 that are identified as composting worms. There's 3 major categories: anesic, endogeic, and epigeic. And so what we're looking for are the epigeic worms, meaning they're at the surface layer. Those are the composting worms that we want. If you get the other kinds of worms, they're more of a burrower, like they have more of a hibernation cycle, so they're going to be less inclined to be cranking out that compost for you, whereas something like a red wiggler, which is by far the hardiest worm for all climates, they're going to be ready to compost for you basically all year long, as long as you feed them and keep the temperatures between 50 and 80 degrees is ideal. So if you're not interested in red wigglers, if you need something that's more for like a tropical climate, you might want to look at like Indian blues. If you're in a cooler climate, something like a Canadian night crawler. So there's all kinds of different worms out there. I think the red wiggler is probably the easiest to get started with.
That's a good point, because I threw out the word red wiggler, and that's only because I've been doing research, so I knew a little bit about them. So how do you currently generate an income from or because of your worms and your worm farm?
Yeah, so I'm getting really excited to tell this story over at Hey, It's a Good Life. Is basically, how did I turn one sheet of paper into a 10K payday over and over and over again? And I'm learning to just be transparent with my numbers. And I know that might make some people uncomfortable. We all have beliefs around money, but I'm realizing that I'm really wired as an entrepreneur to help other people become entrepreneurs and be successful with that. And so I'm just going to be really frank with people here. That I turned, my freebie into a 10K payday over and over and over again for myself. So it's not like I make 10K every month just from all my worm farming stuff, but I took an idea, I tested that idea, like we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast and the beginning of this show. You take an idea and you test it. And one of the easiest ways to test that is with a free concept in the form of a PDF, a video. In my case, it was a PDF. And I stacked as much value as I possibly could. I answered every question that I could possibly answer when it comes to starting with worm farming. Where do I get my worms? What do I need? How do I set it up? Video tutorials. I put it all in this one PDF, real value packed. And I get so many opt-ins now every day, meaning people that are coming to my website saying, yeah, I want that thing. Give that thing to me. And that is so valuable to me as a content creator, because now I have that line of communication with somebody who is in my target audience, who I could potentially upsell my course to, which is like the ultimate thing in the funnel. And funnels is another really fun thing that I love talking about, but I won't go there just yet. So I turned that PDF into an ebook. So now we've taken something that was free and turned it into a $10 or $15 product. Again, just making sure that the value is there. And then it was like, okay, the idea again is proven. So now we've expanded what we're talking about, and we've proven that idea, and we've proven that people want this thing. And yet there's still room to grow here. How else can we serve people at an even higher level? How can we even pack the value even more? I like the 10x rule of like, if you are going to offer somebody something that really is valued at $1,000, which our course, it's going to save you $1,000 on compost every year. So our course is valued essentially at $1,000, but price it 10x lower. So it costs about $100 to join our course. But what do you get? You get the VIP experience where you're getting those lessons. You're getting that community where we're all talking and sharing ideas from all over the world, which is huge, especially when it comes to climate and climate changes and seasonal changes. You're getting so much, and then you're getting the workbook, which is amazing for homeschool families. And so just talking about one stream of income as far as like this whole worm farming thing, we took a freebie, turned it into an ebook, and then launched it as a course, and had several very high, in my opinion, my goal last year was like, okay, I want to hit 10K months. Like, how do I do that? Because in my mind, if I can hit 10K, we can hit more than that. And then that's going to bring my husband home. And then we're going to fund our farm dream. And then we're going to get on the farm. And then we're going to help more people learn how to do this. And then we're going to launch people into their dreams. It just keeps going and going. So it's like, all right, how do I just hit 10K months? And so, I turned that into a 10K month, several months in a row. And so, yeah, you have to get creative eventually with your products. Right now we're in the phase of how do we get paid advertising to work for us, because our organic reach is like, I think we've probably tapped into the market here on Instagram and YouTube of people that want our course. So it's like, how do we get the message out there to more people, which is why we're developing an affiliate program, which again is another way to make money on the homestead, which I'm sure you talk about. And so, yeah, it's exciting because then you're helping other people win. So now we're going to open up the opportunity for fellow entrepreneurs to join what we're doing in our entrepreneurial thing. And my goal with my affiliate program is not to just be like, here, here's a link, here you go. It's, okay, I'm going to invest in you because your success is not only my success, but I am rooting for you as a person. Like, how can I give you some business knowledge basics to run with this? And so I plan to help my affiliates with funnel building and advertising and understanding target market and all of that stuff, copy, all that good stuff, which is more than we're going to talk about here today. But yeah, taking a freebie, turning it into an ebook, and then turning that into a course is really how we monetize the whole worm farming thing. And then, of course, you get a small amount from a humble sized YouTube like mine. We make I want to say a couple $100 there a month, which is nice. I like that. But it's not enough to fund the farm dream. And so that's where we have to get creative and figure out different offers that serve people at a really high level. So kind of long-winded. Yeah. Sorry.
So that was a great answer. I love it because you're speaking my language. I've been an entrepreneur since I was a little kid, and everything, just, all of that. Funnels. You spoke my language when you started saying funnels. But we won't get into funnels right now because that's not the beginner stage of this. But I love what you did and what you took the freebie. Okay, so I keep telling people, get people on, start an email list. I actually did a mini course on it a little while, I just finished it on it because I felt like if you start your email list now, you will be so ahead of most people. So how you start your email list is like what Natalie's saying with her freebie, and how I've also grown my email list. And you just get people in your funnel and they end up finding the products that you have. So it's a nice way to like kind of be hands off. You do all the work up front and then you're kind of hands off, and then you just support people as they're in your funnel. But we will talk about that at another time. So last question, I guess, is what do you have available for anyone who wants to get started? Well, you kind of mentioned you have the freebie, but like go over that again, like all the things that you have available for people wanting to start worm composting and whatever you have. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation to just shamelessly plug myself here. Yeah, so we have a lot of different things helping urban homesteaders. That's really like our target market right now. If we're going to talk in business terms, the people that we are right now, the people that we want to help. And so we have the freebie, the ebook, and the worm farming course, but we also offer other things on our website. Like we have a mobile greenhouse. I put a greenhouse on wheels because we're renters. And so I thought, I'm not going to build a greenhouse and leave it here. Like, I'm going to build a greenhouse and take it with me. So I put it on wheels. It's a really cool story. And this is where I tell people, like, don't be scared to dream, because when you say yes and you take that next indicated step, God, the universe, like whatever your concept is, it provides. God, in my belief system, it's God, and he totally heard me when I said I wanted a greenhouse. I sketched it out on paper to the exact dimensions. You guys, this is what's so wild is I sketched it out on my notebook. I said, okay, three tiers, pitched roof, 6 foot by 9. I'm sorry, 3 foot by 6 foot is like the poles that I need to hold everything together. It was the middle of what we all just went through 2 years ago, and lumber prices were through the roof. What do you know? That on the side of the road, I found all of the wood that I needed for this greenhouse pre-cut to the exact dimensions that I had outlined. Okay. Like it does not get better than that. And I had some other things on my wish list. They were there on the side of the road, 5-gallon buckets, a couple other things that I needed. It's just really blew my mind. So we have the mobile greenhouse plans, and you'll get to hear the story when you get those plans. We have our garden bed plans. Again, we're like still on that newlywed budget. So every profit that we're making right now is going back into our business. And so that means we do everything in a really budget friendly way. So all of my garden beds are actually made out of cedar fence pickets. It's one of the most affordable ways to build a garden bed if you're like me on a concrete patch and you want to grow a garden. And so we have the garden bed plans available as well.
Wasn't that a great interview? I just love how Natalie didn't wait until she had the perfect property to get started, and how she has taken a simple thing like worm composting and made it a lucrative business. I asked her if she made money actually from vermicompost, like the actual compost itself, and she said that that's in the works. So they are going to be venturing into more of that. But she also said that she has saved $1,000 a year on making her own compost, which turns out to be a lifetime of $55,000. So there are benefits in saving money as well. And I just love how she has her approach to everything. And I am definitely going to start my vermicomposting again. It is definitely a fun thing to watch those worms do their thing. Okay, that's the end of this episode, and we will be back next week with another interview episode. And I hope you come back and listen to our guest next week. And don't forget to download the free 101 Homestead Income Ideas list to get started on finding your ideal homestead income stream.